Hello and welcome back to ADHD Support Talk Radio. ADHD Support Talk Radio is sponsored by ADDclasses.com, and ADDclasses.com is actually celebrating its 20th anniversary. You can learn more about ADDclasses.com by going to the website www.addclasses.com. And ADHD Support Talk Radio is the longest running podcast specifically for adults with ADHD. My name is Tara McGillicuddy, and I am the founder, creator, and co-host of the ADHD Support Talk Radio podcast. And in just a moment, my co-host Lynn Idris and I are going to be talking about breaking things down. But Lynn, before we get started talking about the topic, can you let the listeners know a bit about yourself for those of you who may not remember or don't know?
Absolutely. As Tara said, my name's Lynn Idris. I am Tara's co-host here on ADHD Support Talk. I am also a productivity and ADHD coach. So I empower professionals and entrepreneurs to take control of their time and their lives so that they can perform at the level of their abilities and have more time and energy for what matters most to them. You can learn more about me through my website. It's www.coachingadvantages.com. And if you text the keyword MyQuiz, MyQuiz, no spaces or anything, to the number 33777, you'll get complimentary access to my online productivity breakthrough quiz and get personalized results and recommendations to help you make the most of your time.
And like I said, my name is Tara McGillicuddy. I am the creator, co-host of ADHD Support Talk Radio. Like Lynn, I'm also a woman with ADHD. I'm an ADHD productivity coach. I wear a few different other professional hats. You can learn more about me and the products and services I offer by going to my website, taramcgillicuddy.com. So today, Lynn and I are going to be talking about breaking things down. And if you're new to the ADHD world or have been involved in the ADHD world and learning skills, you've probably heard that breaking things down is a great strategy for adults with ADHD. So, Lynn, where would you like to get started talking on this topic?
I think that almost everyone who either works with people with ADHD or has ADHD themselves has heard the recommendation that they should break things down.
Mm-hmm.
But it isn't always easy, right? And
No.
how you break things down, what that looks like is very different for every person. And what's really going to be effective can also be situational and circumstantial. So we wanted to talk a little bit about, what to keep in mind when you're breaking things down, because what that looks like for you is going to be different than what that looks like for me. And what that looks like for me in certain circumstances is also going to differ. So I think it's really important to realize that it sounds like a simple strategy or simple recommendation, but it really does require some self-awareness. And I think ultimately honoring what works for you once you are aware of what that is. Does that make sense?
And like you said, it depends on person to person, individual, and then also situation to situation. Like
absolutely,
certain task or project you might break down in a certain way, something different you might break down in a certain way, and depending on the time of the day and who knows everything else, you might break it down a certain way. But maybe we could start talking about what are some of the ways we break things down. Give an example.
Absolutely. So one of the things I hear a lot from clients is, I know I should break things down, but either I sit down and break things down and then I feel so fried that I, have a hard time jumping in or actually getting started, or I start to break things down and I get totally overwhelmed by the number of things, or, all of the stuff, right? All of the pieces and all of the parts. And I always tell my clients, like, that's okay. Recognizing that, accepting and acknowledging it is what really matters. So paying attention to what I always call it like your threshold for overwhelm or your threshold for clutter is. So before we started the recording, I was saying like how I would break down a certain kind of a project. Like say I'm working on content for a course or a webinar or something like that. I would sit down and start kind of high level and think through kind of like, these are the big picture, I always call them buckets of things I want to make sure that are included, and then break down each one of those buckets, separately. but I would not do that all in one sitting. Some
Yeah.
people would
Okay.
do better to do that all in one sitting because they're already transitioned in,
Mhm.
they're aware, they're comfortable, they're more familiar, and they get themselves kind of in the groove. And that's a great way to do it.
Yep.
When I'm doing my taxes, I really want to break that down in a different way, right? The way I approach taxes is different than the way probably anybody else approaches taxes, but I have a checklist, but I don't want to see the whole checklist at one time. If I see the whole checklist at one time, I'm going to go find something else to do. Odds
Yeah.
are just good. I'm easily overwhelmed by the number of steps it takes for me to get my taxes ready to send to the accountant. So I'm aware of what it feels like when I'm starting to get overwhelmed or I'm
Yeah.
starting to get shut down or worn down or whatever that is of the pieces and the parts of breaking things down. And I think it's really important to pay attention to that and to honor that. It's
Yeah.
okay. We learning how to break things down, different kinds of things in different situations in a way that really works for you is it really is going to be different for every single person.
Yeah.
What about you, Tara?
Yeah, one of the reasons I was thinking about doing this topic is I spoke at the Crush Your ADHD Summit a month ago, whatever it
Right,
was. And one of the suggestions I was talking about in my topic was breaking things down, making a list of steps for certain things before you start working on it.
right,
And I had a couple people, because I did a Q&A afterwards, write in and say, but what happens when you make that list and the amount of steps on it are overwhelming? And I'm like,
right,
okay, that makes sense. Some of it is you've probably never looked at it before like this with the steps, so it's new and different, and you've probably never realized how many steps are involved. So that might be just, if that's the case, maybe just take a deep breath and understand the overwhelm associated with it is a lot of it because you haven't seen it before.
right.
And there are a lot of steps, but what I recommend in that situation, if you're not used to breaking it down and doing a step-by-step procedure for something that you're putting off, for something that's challenging, maybe take a few minutes and think of something you do naturally, something that's easy to do. And maybe just write out the procedure and steps for that. And if you were going to teach it to somebody else, and what you might find is it's something you do naturally, something you understand how to do. But wow, there are a ton of steps and you can do it. You've done it before. So that might be that type of thing. That's one way to look at it. And like, I've been doing this podcast for years now, and uploading it, getting the podcast itself
Yep.
up. I'm like, I'm just going to get the podcast up. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm going to take my advice. This is something I do. Usually it's easy. Sometimes I put it off or whatever. And I'm like, it's going to take 10 minutes. It really isn't, because
No.
I'm like, okay, I'm going to write out the step-by-step approach to doing it. And it was a page worth. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
maybe this, and it doesn't take 10 minutes, it probably takes 90 minutes to do because there's a
Yeah.
lot involved.
Right.
But what I was able to do is say, okay, I can do this. This is something I'm doing. So that's something, when you have that overwhelm because of the number of steps, maybe look, that's one approach. As we're both looking at things, thinking about this topic, there are different approaches. This is something I
Absolutely.
might do, and you might be like, yeah, I did that, didn't work. But how can you tweak it to breaking it down so it will work for you?
Absolutely. And knowing that it's not going to be the same, like how you break things down in a way that really is effective for you
Yeah.
is not going to be the same for every single thing you do. So
Yes.
I always want my clients to like first ask yourself, like, why are you breaking this thing down? Are you breaking it down because you don't know all that it kind of includes or all that it encompasses? Are
Mm-hmm.
you breaking it down because you're having a hard time getting started?
Yep.
Are you breaking it down because the whole thing has shut you down to begin with and you're breaking it down to find a smaller piece to take action on that you
Mm-hmm.
actually, can get some movement going and build some momentum? Those are different ways. I'm not saying this well, but those are different reasons that you would want to break something down.
Mm-hmm.
And the approach is probably going to be very different.
Yes.
Right. So if you are breaking something down because you're overwhelmed by it and you're trying to find a piece to just help yourself get started,
Mm-hmm.
then you've got to really pay attention to what your threshold is for overwhelm. Are you someone in a certain circumstance with this particular task or activity or project who just wants to think about, okay, this is the next one action I know I can take,
Yep.
or these are the next two or three actions I know I can take? or these are the next 10. If you're
Yes.
going to capture 10 down and you start to get shut down, then know that sticking with the first one or two or three or wherever that threshold is for you is okay. Of course,
Hmm.
the key is, how are you going to remember to come back to it? So
Yes.
one of the
Yes.
things that I do with my clients, and I do this often depending on what the project is and why I'm breaking it down, it will determine how I'm breaking it down. But if it's, say, like a longer term project and I want to keep it moving, I will keep what I call the single action item, the next single action item in my
Hmm.
to-do list.
Yes.
And I have to know that that is something that I am like 100% confident that I can actually do a piece of that size. Then I know all I'm going to do is that one piece. And then when I cross that one piece off, I add the next one. Like
Yeah.
while I'm still working in the project, then I capture what the next action item is and keep it moving forward like that. If it's something that you need to move forward more quickly than that, then you want to adapt that, the next 3 things, the next 2 things, the next 5
Hmm.
things. But that notion of being aware of your threshold for overwhelm is really important.
Hmm.
And if you're someone who wants to break the whole, say you want to get most of the steps or most of the pieces or elements broken down, and then looking at it overwhelms you, then find a way to create what I call blinders for
Yes.
yourself.
Yeah.
I think in other countries they call them blinkers, right? But
Hmm.
like the things they put on the sides of a horse's eyes so
Yep.
you can't, when they're racing, so they can't see what's in the perimeter. So, cover up, tape a piece of paper.
No,
Um,
seriously.
yeah, put a
If
page
your
break in an
list is
electronic document.
on a physical
Absolutely.
notebook, cover it up with a piece of paper. If it's in a computerized technological,
Yeah.
digital, that's the term I'm looking for. Copy and paste 1 to 3 of those things in a different document or something like that.
Absolutely.
And I like the fact that you brought up that you start with one at a time, one action step or
Yes.
one
Yep.
action item that you're going to focus on. And like you say,
Yes.
you can tweak it, adjust it for what you're working on. Maybe depending on what it is, it goes from one, it goes to 3 or 5, but you're not
Right.
looking at the 101 steps or whatever it
Right.
is, because that is overwhelming in itself.
Right. It will shut me down altogether. Like
Yes,
I won't
paralyze your
even
brain.
want to look at it. So I
Yeah,
always tell my clients, like, pay attention to that resistance. When you resist looking at the thing because it's so much, it overwhelms you,
yeah,
find a way to create those blinders,
yeah,
hide what you're not looking at, filter it, whatever, depending on how you're doing it,
yeah,
but find a way to honor that. It really is, honoring what works for you. That's what
yeah.
it's all about.
And we're talking more about the act of the project or task, breaking it down. But another way to look at things is breaking down the amount of time you spend working on something, taking action on
Yes.
it. Because we have huge projects, and some of them might take days, weeks, years, depending on what it is.
Mhm.
But if you just start with a block, a chunk of time, depending on what it is,
Right.
maybe just 5 minutes, set your timer for 5 minutes. Say you're clearing out the clutter, maybe set the timer for 5 minutes and attack the clutter for 5 minutes, throw things away, do whatever for just 5 minutes. And what happens with that is and I'm just giving 5 minutes as an example. You might, go a little bit higher. You're getting things done. You're taking
Right.
action. You're being productive in that 5 minutes. It's rewiring your brain and it's
Hmm.
focusing on the success. Because what might happen is, okay, I threw away 100 items in 5 minutes or whatever you did. Focus on what you got done in that moment
Yes.
or that time block instead of or in addition to what you still have to do. Because what we
Right.
switch is, okay, yeah, I only work for 5 minutes, I only got 10 things done, I still have 100 things to do. Not
Right.
saying ignore what you still have to do, but when you focus on that smaller chunk of success, that will change your brain chemistry for the better and help you be more
Absolutely.
successful and productive.
So you're acknowledging what you've done and what you've
Yeah.
accomplished and giving yourself credit for it helps to reinforce what you want to do again and more often as you come back to it, right? It
Mhm.
really is, it's firing up that focus on success and focus on acknowledging your progress really does give you a dopamine boost when you need one, right? Because if
Mhm.
you remember,
Yeah.
our our brains don't process dopamine the way the rest of the world does. So we need other ways to improve the way we feel reward and reinforcement to make up for that dopamine difference. It's
Mm.
really it's really important. And it really does reframe. And
It
then
does.
while you're in the project, I always say, like, if you're taking a step-by-step approach to a project, decide what the next concrete action step is before you walk away from it.
Yes,
So
yes,
while you're in it, while you've transitioned in and you're feeling sort of, I don't know, warmed up, comfortable, familiar with, kind of what it is that you're doing, decide now what
yes,
that next likely action step is going to be, and, put it on your to-do list, schedule
yeah.
it for yourself, whatever your process is. That's a lot easier than coming back and looking at it cold and asking yourself, what should the next step
Yeah.
be?
So while you're working on it, because what can happen is we can get interrupted and distracted by things that are really important. And
Or not, right?
or but either way, but sometimes
Right.
it can be challenging to come back to it. And if you have
Absolutely.
thought that out while you're closing out the time you're working on it, whatever you want to call it, and you put it somewhere, you record it, whether it's writing it down if you're a visual person or even speaking into a recorder, but have it somewhere outside of your brain, somewhere you can come back to it, because we're taken away from the things by like maybe it's Candy Crush, maybe it's a family emergency, maybe it's just something more exciting is coming that you're focusing on. But either way, I think that's a very important, that what is that next action item while you're still working on it.
Absolutely, because that's going to minimize the transition required to get back into it.
Yes,
It's going to
yes.
help minimize some of the resistance you're going to feel. And
Mhm.
there are so many times, I don't know about you, Tara, but I'll be working on something and I can feel like I'm in like a really good flow, but I
Mhm.
have to stop, or I want to stop, or maybe
Yeah.
I just know it's time to take a break. If I don't, you know, capture, I always call it, leave myself a trail of breadcrumbs for next
Yeah.
time, that's very clear about where I'm starting and what the next step is,
Mhm.
then the next time I come back to it, sometimes it
Yeah.
feels like I have no idea what this thing is. I've never
Yes.
seen it before.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to take all of this energy and all of this focus and all of this
Yeah.
effort just to get myself into it again.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's huge. That
Yeah.
could be huge.
Yeah, and it might be that you write it down in a post-it note. It might be, and we're all
Hmm.
different. This is the thing. It's like how you process and what are you going to notice? And I know what I used to do, I still do it sometimes, but I used to do a lot, is I'd leave myself little notes that would just be one word. It was not enough. That was
Yeah.
my shortcut. If I was to like, write 5 words instead of one word.
Right.
So, make sure that it's what you're doing is going to help you when you come back to it, that it's going to trigger your brain and help you remember where you were working, and so you're not creating the steps again. And I know I've been in
Reinventing
things,
the
I'm like,
wheel.
oh wait a minute, I already did this, I didn't need to spend a half hour returning to do
Right.
this again. I just didn't save it in a place where I can remember it, or
Right.
something like that.
Right. And that's where having your system set up to really
Yeah.
support you it's so important, because they've
Mhm.
got to work with your tendencies and, how you process, how you remember, how you look for things, all of that. It really have to
Mhm.
be set up to work for you. But learning how to break things down in a way
Yep.
that is effective for you in different scenarios, and not beating yourself up when you have
Yeah.
a hard time, or
Yes.
when you get overwhelmed by breaking things down. It's really, really important to
Yeah.
to learn what works for you and to honor it, and to do that without judgment and blame and all of
Yes.
that kind of ugly stuff.
So this might be like, people might say, okay, I've been told to break things down, but breaking things down doesn't work for me. And I think it might be that the way you broke things down may not have been the best way for you to break things down for you as an individual or for the type of thing you were working on.
Absolutely.
So give
Absolutely.
breaking things down another try or multiple tries.
Absolutely. And get curious. I always
Mhm.
say, like, get curious,
Yes.
get unattached.
Yes. Yes.
Don't
Detaching.
attach to how it oughta or should, as I'm using my
Yeah.
quotey
Yeah.
fingers, you can't see, how it should be done, how you should be able to
Yes.
break things down. Get creative, get curious, tinker,
Yes.
play, experiment, find what works for you
Yeah.
and what doesn't work for you. And
Yeah.
it's such an important piece of it. And if you can do that without self-judgment and
Yeah.
without blame and without shame,
Yeah.
it's gonna benefit
And
you tremendously.
detaching does take time and practice for a lot of us,
Absolutely.
because I'm a
Absolutely.
very emotional person, very
Mm-hmm.
sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
So by default, I attach emotion to just about everything. When I
Yeah.
can take a deep breath and detach and focus on, okay, I'm going to look this from an analytical point of view, or
Mm-hmm.
a detective type of point of view and just literally,
Yep.
what about this worked? And what about this didn't work? What can I change? And, if you have a little bit or a lot of emotion to begin with, just know you can practice detaching.
Absolutely. I often talk to my clients about nothing really is a failure.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing really
Yep.
is kind of like a lost opportunity. There's always some data you can gather.
Yes.
So
Yes.
focus on gathering data. In
Mm-hmm.
this kind of circumstance, this worked well for me. In this kind of circumstance, this didn't work well for
Yeah.
me. If you can really focus on it being information you can work with,
Yeah.
and not a failure or something that you did wrong, that can help tremendously with that
Yes.
shift.
Yeah, and failures, I hate that word failure. I know, learning experience, but I think,
Mm.
we've been through the school system and,
Oh
we
yeah.
had the
Yeah.
red pen, we had the Fs with the 50% and
Right. And we've all got that
yeah. Yeah,
perfectionistic
but
piece.
what can I learn from it? And a lot of my, big wins and things I've been creative about are because the way everyone else was doing it wasn't working for me, or
Right.
I wanted to do it differently so it worked better for other people. So failure, like I said, I don't really like that word. It helps us learn and it can help us find like the best situation possible, the best task projects, whatever it is, because
Best way of doing something for
yeah,
you.
if
Yeah,
we can
absolutely.
get past the negative emotions associated with the word failure. Okay, Lynn,
Absolutely.
I think we're going on a bit of a different topic, or a lot of a different topic. Is there anything in relationship to breaking things down that you didn't share today that you'd like to share, or maybe any final last thoughts?
Off the top of my head, I think that one of the most important things is to like really focus on tinkering, playing, experimenting, and being aware of how you feel when you're trying to do something in a certain way,
Yes.
right? How you feel about it matters. Like it matters a lot, right? So if someone's telling you, or you're thinking that you should break things down in a certain way, but you resist it, you put it off, you have that, ugh, you can't make me, or that I can't look
Mhm.
at it, it's too much. Like that's all okay. That's
Yes,
important
yes,
data to gather. Then
yes.
you can experiment and tinker and play and come up with what works for you, because there's no wrong way to do it, and there's no imperfect way to do it.
Yeah.
You've got to do it in the way that works for you in that situation.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. And I know sometimes the way I go about breaking things down or doing things, people would look at me like, what are you doing? But it works for me most of the time.
Right.
So, Lynn,
Absolutely.
before we get going, could you give out your contact information?
Sure. Again, I'm Lynn Idris, your co-host here at ADHD Support Talk, and you can learn more about me and what I do at coachingadvantages.com.
And I am Tara McGillicuddy. You can learn more about me at taramcgillicuddy.com. And you can go to our website, adhdsupporttalk.com, where you can find past episodes. You can also click on the community link and sign up for our Facebook group. Thanks again for listening, everyone. This is Tara McGillicuddy of ADHD Support Talk Radio.